You must turn the lights on. Turn the light on.
Back to work, boy.
Following up their impressive Max Payne series, where company figurehead Sam Lake got to digitise himself as the lead character, Remedy went on to switch gears in 2010 with their excellent action, horror and psychological thriller of Alan Wake. Released back on the Xbox 360, Alan Wake allowed Remedy to keep the third-person view of previous games, but completely change the setting, tone and explore a much different story than Max Payne. Alan Wake has aged quite well overall, but let's take a look at its strengths and weaknesses, both as they were back then and how it translates to today. How does it compare to Remedy's more recent games of Quantum Break and Control, and how Alan Wake paved the way for those later games? For this psychological thriller that mixes with horror, let's jump down the rabbit hole and see how this twisted story plays out. If you're more familiar with Remedy's more recent offerings such as Control or Quantum Break, and you liked those stories, then Alan Wake is most probably going to be for you too. This isn't a straightforward and easily understood narrative, so you may need to delve deep into it in order to understand its various parts. The story of Alan Wake does not let up, and it keeps going all the way through until the end. It's constantly giving information and probably trying to confuse you as well. Players follow Alan Wake, an author who is suffering from writer's block. He and his wife Alice decide to take a vacation to Bright Falls, Washington. And that's all you really need to know. The strange and weird pretty much kicks in from the start of the game, and going in knowing as little as possible is best. Now for me, the best part of Alan Wake is in its story and setting. The narrative is compelling, and I always wanted to push forward to know more and how everything would come together. Couple that with its Stephen King / Twin Peaks setting and atmosphere, influences which it proudly wears on its sleeve, and what we have are two huge reasons why Alan Wake is still remembered so fondly. It's the classic idea of trying to understand what is real, what is false, and what is the true reality that our lead character exists in. Taking a look at the graphics now, this hasn't been updated for the current gen Xboxes, so you will be playing the game through backwards compatibility and experiencing it how the game was back in 2010. Character models are quite good without being outstanding of course, but the game does have a little jarring effect when moving from gameplay to cutscenes where the detail is noticeably increased. But the best parts of Alan Wake from a graphical standpoint lie in two areas, and that's in its lighting and environmental landscapes. If these two areas were remastered or remade with the technology of today, then they really would be something to behold. They look good, but nothing beyond that, and that's fine when we take into account the age of the game. It does run at a sub-HD resolution, so be prepared for your eyes to be filled with some blurry textures, jaggies everywhere, and shimmering, and all of these things, or at least one, is usually present on screen, especially during the daylight scenes. And when I say blurry textures, I'm not kidding. By today's standards, they look downright horrible when viewed even at medium range much of the time. Apart from those issues, which will always be present unless the game receives an Xbox One X enhancement or players move to the PC where the game fares better in the graphics department. But the shortcomings of the previous generation of consoles are still on display at these times, and a further example of this would be the hands of characters, which are mostly stagnant during gameplay and cutscenes, whereby the fingers don't move at all. Moving to nighttime, where much of the game is set as well, the importance of light itself becomes apparent, and I'll expand on this when discussing gameplay later. The game can be very dark at times, so players have Alan's torch, the street lights, or the lights on buildings and cars that will give off a glow, which still looks good today, as does the constant fog, which will slowly swirl around the environment. One effect I did like was when entering an area with enemies, and the game will employ a number of shadows which will be cast all over the screen, and apart from being a visual cue that something is about to happen, it introduces some more variety as well. Watching the enemies explode in a series of flashes and lights from the combination of your torch and weapons still actually looks very good, even when you've seen it so many times already as you play. Performance wise, the game is pretty much what most games dished up last generation, so expect 30 frames a second on the console, but there are some slight fluctuations when it comes to this area. but I've never seen it as an issue. When it comes to the sound of Alan Wake, then you owe it to yourself to play with headphones on. This mostly goes for any survival horror or psychological thriller game, as it just adds so much to the experience and creates an atmosphere which I found to be lacking if you're using standard TV speakers or even surround sound systems. The headphones allows your entire world to be filled with the sounds of this often dark and foreboding world. The music only enhances this experience and feeling as well, whether the subtleness of the Alan Wake song or the fantastic and diverse The Writer's Dream, which changes quite a lot towards the back end, or Welcome to Bright Falls, which just fits the setting superbly, blending a mix of dread and hope. Those are just 3 examples amongst an incredible soundtrack. Then we have the sound effects of gunfire or when enemies explode, plus the classic jump scares as well. But my favourite were the whispers from voices that you would hear at certain times. The setting itself of this sleepy mountain town with the sounds of wind, water and birds help make it believable, and really, there doesn't need to be much more aside from footsteps, reloading weapons or opening doors. The silence, which is sometimes apparent, is just as important. Dialogue itself is mostly good between all of the characters, with an emphasis where it's needed or a subtlety when it isn't. Whether it's conveying anger, helplessness or, well, creepiness, it's well done for the most part, without it hitting that amazing level, although I did really enjoy Alan's narration when it came to what was happening or something he was thinking. An inside look into his thought process and mindset within this place where reality, the supernatural and even the insane seem to be bleeding into one another. If you were to have me to pick the weakest area of Alan Wake, then that's going to be its gameplay. It isn't bad at all, it's just that other areas of the game, such as its setting and story, are more memorable than the pretty standard run-of-the-mill third-person gameplay. Alan Wake is mostly a linear game whereby you're constantly moving forward to the next area, even if it may be circling around to somewhere you have been before. A nice touch is when Alan himself may spot a previous location in the distance and make mention of it. The process of moving forward is only sometimes broken up by needing to overcome a certain environmental obstacle, but I wouldn't even go so far as to call them puzzles, as they are very straightforward with absolutely minimal effort in needing to actually solve anything. It's mostly just being pointed to a certain area to flick a switch, which will raise and lower a platform or open a gate. But the main part of the gameplay is of course about using the guns and weapons and the flashlight mechanic, which is a huge part of the game. Now, weapons and ammo including flares and flashbangs are simply laying around the environment, but are often contained in cases which are attached to a light source. This serves as a kind of safe area for Alan, as enemies won't follow him into the light, and will also regenerate his health at the same time. The fact that ammo and flares, for example, were contained in these locations and not just laying around at all times was a nice touch, as I'd imagine these remote, cold locations to have some sort of supplies available if hikers or rangers needed access to them to protect themselves from wildlife or in order to signal for help with a flare. Players have access to such weapons as the revolver, hunting rifle or shotgun, plus the likes of flares and flashbangs, which I mentioned before. The flashbang is crucial sometimes in dealing with groups of enemies all at once, especially when some are harder to take down than others. When bumping up the difficulty though, knowing the best time to use this finite resource is important, as is maybe simply running away, knowing when to fight or flee instead of standing your ground and going through most, if not all, of your ammo and items. Flashbangs can in fact kill weakened enemies as opposed to flares, which the main use is really for crowd control as you try to weaken the group and try and kill a couple of them first. Ammo for the revolver is more readily available than that for the hunting rifle or shotgun, but stronger enemies will take a number of bullets to take down, so it's better to get up close with the shotgun or stay back and hit them with the hunting rifle. Weapons can also be reloaded faster by repeatedly tapping the reload button. But speaking of reloading, this same sort of mechanic when attached to your regular flashlight or heavy duty version doesn't quite work, as if anybody had a torch whose batteries ran out this quickly, you would very quickly throw it away. Batteries drain so fast when aiming the flashlight at enemies or objects, so players will also be collecting batteries, and these need to be changed regularly during gunfights as well. There is also those classic gaming moments whereby you come across a healthy amount of ammunition or items, and then you just know you'll be needing to use most of that in the very next scene when the enemies appear. The combat is quite repetitive over the course of the game, and needing to constantly change the flashlight's batteries can become tiresome. Dodging enemy attacks when they are close is just a simple button click which will show the swing and miss from the enemy in slow motion, which is a nice touch, but often you'll be running to create some distance between you and the enemy, depending on the weapon you're using, or to perhaps head towards the nearest light for some protection and regain your health. But running more than a short distance reveals just how unfit Alan himself is. Getting tired over such a short distance, considering he's had writer's block recently, he would have had plenty of time to hit the gym or simply run around the block for a cardio workout. Even when tired, his jog is barely more than a brisk walk. When we compare Alan Wake to the likes of Control and Quantum Break, it's clear that Remedy decided to up the action and gunplay with those games, whilst also introducing more mechanics and abilities such as time manipulation in Quantum Break, or being able to pick up and throw objects at enemies such as in Control. But as the gameplay became more fleshed out, the story and general weirdness of those games stayed intact as well, especially in Control, but each also employed different ways in telling their stories, namely Quantum Break having a TV show to go along with it. When we take the Max Payne series into account as well, then Alan Wake would be the least action-oriented amongst the whole bunch. But at least for myself, after the latest playthrough of Alan Wake, it very well could be my favourite Remedy game overall. It doesn't hit the same gameplay highs, but it also never overstays its welcome, where I feel like there was a bunch of filler content. What we have is a linear, psychological thriller which focuses on its story and the dilemma which the main character finds himself in. It's a game worthy of replaying and trying to dissect all of its parts, and apart from its weaknesses in the technical department, Alan Wake is still a highly enjoyable and much loved game from beginning all the way until the end credits roll.